January has been a bit of a weird one for me, reading-wise, which is like not what you want to start off your new year. You want to jump in with a fresh, awesome new book. You read your best books, best foot forward, best book forward. Didn't happen. I mean, it kind of did. I read some good ones. But I also DNF'd a lot of books. I also told myself I'd never use the phrase DNF because you would just say didn't finish. It just seems like a pointless... Anyway, I've never liked it, and now I say it all the time. So I read some books. Here they are. Also, I'm going to try and say something really meaningful about every book, even if it's a book that I actually ended up putting down, and you'll see why. This is actually the last book that I read in 2021, but I want to mention it here because it was the first video that I made for 2022, the first review that I did, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a collection of 3 novellas by Junichiro Tanizaki, beautifully, beautifully translated, and it was a really, really great start to the year reading this at New Year's. I was living in The Hague for a while, and it was just perfect. It was a great start to the year, so I'm kind of holding on to this as a great start to the new year, especially as I look to hopefully moving back to Japan this year. This kind of almost felt like it represented that, but I'm not going to say anything about it because I've mentioned it in a few videos now, including its own dedicated review, so please go watch that if you want my thoughts on this book. However, the first book that I actually read in 2022 was this, and I didn't finish it, but it's complicated. This is Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdez. This is her debut. It is heavily inspired by all of the science fiction, video games, and pop culture stuff that she grew up on. You can tell, and in a lot of ways that makes it a really wonderful novel. I didn't finish it because I don't think it is for me anymore. I think I would have loved this book 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I have this thing where quite often after I read a really heavy literary novel, something that is grounded and moving and nuanced and complicated, I feel like I need to then escape into a really fun, campy, happy piece of genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, something even YA. And all I end up doing is I try that and I never like the book. I just struggle with happy YA adventure genre fiction. Even though in my mind, that's the stuff I love the most. It's just not true anymore. My image of myself hasn't caught up to the truth, if you like. So I went into this book really hopeful because it's inspired by so many of the video games and movies and novels that I've enjoyed growing up, and I really thought that this would be potentially a new favourite of mine, and I really like the cover. Instead, I found something that would just be ideal for teenage me. It's a YA sci-fi novel for YA sci-fi fans, and I am not a YA anymore, even though I act like one. So I think this is a good book for its target demographic. I don't want to say anything negative about Chilling Effect. I read about 100 pages and I thought, yeah, this would be great for me in a different time, just not now. I am going to talk about it in an upcoming planned video about sci-fi by women. So again, I'm going to hold off on saying anything detailed about the plot, the characters, at least what I read. But I do want to emphasize that this isn't a bad book. I just didn't gel with it in the state that I'm in. What I did gel with, however, is a different sci-fi novel, I'm Waiting for You. Reading this in the same month as Chilling Effect kind of proved my point, because this is a very mature piece of science fiction. It is literary, it is philosophical, it is dense, it is also translated from Korean, and so it's very much more in my wheelhouse. So it reminded me that yes, I am at my heart still a huge fan of fantasy and sci-fi. It just has to be fantasy and sci-fi that matches my tastes, and that means that really it should be more mature and literary, even though that makes me sound very pompous, and I'm sorry. But this is a wonderful piece of science fiction, and again, I'm going to mention it in that Sci-Fi by Women video, and I think I might even do a dedicated video on this, because this book came out about a year ago, and I didn't review it, I didn't get a review copy, I didn't ask for one, it passed me by for whatever reason, and so I finally picked it up and I read it and I loved it. The author, Kim Bo-young, is a celebrated science fiction writer in South Korea. She was even a script consultant for Bong Joon-ho when he made Snowpiercer, so she's a big deal, and what you have here are 4 short stories, or novellas, but they are actually 2 pairs. The first and fourth stories are the same narrative from different perspectives, and the second and third stories are within the same universe. The one story, which is I'm Waiting for You and its partner narrative, they tell the story of a couple who are engaged to be married, but they are each away from Earth on different ships and different distances from Earth. The bride is really, really, really far away, light years away from Earth, and she needs to get back, and she's going to go into stasis, and they've got this plan to both arrive on Earth on their wedding day. The groom is a lot closer to Earth. I think he's within our solar system, and so he uses some Einstein relativity stuff that I don't understand to make his journey last a long time on Earth, but not for him. So by going up to light speed and going back down from light speed, he basically makes time on Earth pass by really quickly, years and years and years, while only a few weeks pass for him in his ship. At least I think I'm understanding it right. It's science. So the two of them are trying their best to arrive on Earth at the exact same time, but things keep going wrong, and each of these stories is written as a series of letters back and forth between the two of them. The first story is letters from him to her, and vice versa in the fourth story, and both of them keep coming up against roadblocks, but they are determined to meet again and get married. I cried at this. I realize I'm talking a lot about it, and I really want to save it for upcoming videos, so I'm not going to talk about the other two stories, and they are very, very philosophically heavy. The protagonists are literally the gods that created humanity, so there's a lot to go into there, and I'm very tempted to do like a drunk review. We'll see. The theme for my January was pretty much either science fiction by women or Japanese. And a lot of people read Japanese books in January and they call it Japanuary, which I've never said out loud before. And I read a lot of Japanese lit anyway, so I don't cement myself in that, but I still obviously read a lot of Japanese books, and one of them was Asleep by Banana Yoshimoto. About a week ago, I made a dedicated video about her and her craft and the themes that she explores again and again in her books, so go check that out, because in that video, I talk about all three of the novellas that make up Asleep and how they explore her themes. But long story short, her themes are always about the relationship between people, love between people, death and loss, and also how people change and how we maintain our relationships, and how falling in and out of love and making friends and losing friends and people dying around you, all of this changes you, and how do you maintain your sense of self and your relationships at the same time. These are key themes in Yoshimoto's books, and you really, really see it explored here in these three books expertly. Another Japanese book that I read and I haven't mentioned anywhere, social media, videos, anything, was The Village of 8 Graves by Seishi Okomizo. Now, I found out recently that my reviews have featured on the covers of a bunch of books recently, and nobody told me. Publishers do not tell you if they put your quote on the back of a book. But it's happened to me a lot, and I didn't know. And I just found out the other day that a quote from my original written review of The Honjin Murders by Seishi Okomizo is on the back of that book now. So if you go buy The Honjin Murders, there's a quote from me on it, which is amazing. So I'm going to go out and buy a copy of that so I can have it. But I don't really do written reviews anymore. I pretty much just do all my reviews on YouTube, so I'm going to have to go back and start writing written reviews anymore so I can be on book covers again. Anyway, I loved The Honjin Murders, and so I picked up The Village of 8 Graves, and this is a really, really good murder mystery. However, Seishi Okomizo's version of Hercule Poirot is Detective Kindaichi, and he's not really in this book. It's really weird. I expected him in a very Poirot way to just come along and guide people to the answers, solve the mystery, show off how he did it, and that doesn't really happen. He's just kind of there in the background just watching it all go down, whereas the protagonist is actually our main guy that we're following through the story. He's a guy who finds out that he's actually part of a family from a very rural community, the Village of 8 Graves. This village has a very bloody history and curses and superstitions surrounding its past, and he is wrapped up in that now. He has inherited money. Is it money, or is it just like status? I can't remember now. But he has to go to the village and kind of meet this family that he never knew he had, and deaths start happening. And this is the third time that the village has seen a slew of deaths over the course of hundreds of years. The last time was when his own father went on a killing spree, this father that he didn't even know he had. It's a great setup. It's a great atmosphere. It's a very gothic, kind of campy, fun adventure through this mystery, through this strange, isolated village. I love the setting. I really enjoyed the characters. The second half is pretty much all set in a network of caves, which I didn't expect, and that's not really spoiling anything. And I didn't like that as much. I preferred the first half. But still good. Still a solid book, just kind of light on the murder mystery, and the detective himself isn't really there. I mostly enjoyed this for its vibes, its setting, and its events, but not so much the actual murder mystery aspect. I'm also very, very slowly working my way through this trilogy. This, as a lot of you probably know, is the Broken Earth trilogy. I really, really enjoyed, what's it called? The fifth season? The fifth season. And so I read The Obelisk Gate. And it's just more of the same. It's more brilliant N.K. Jemisin world building. It's interesting how these books are fantasy, but I keep wanting to call them sci-fi. And I think it's because of the reveals that come as you go through the book, and you see a lot of these reveals coming. There's a lot of things that you just kind of expect to happen. They're not really twists, but the world just kind of gradually grows in a very organic way, and this is a tremendous trilogy of books. It got so much praise and attention, and it is so deserved. The world that Jemisin builds here is remarkable, but more than that, it's the way that she plays with narrative, the way that she plays with first, second, and third person, the way that she plays with time, and the way that time shifts and moves, and how the past feels longer than the present. These shifts between time and space, you can almost feel it like you're living through it. As you read through these books, you feel lost in them, as if Jemisin is literally playing with time and putting you in a time machine and messing with your sense of chronology. It's wild. I really love these books. Oh, she's good. So I made the same mistake twice in a month, and I read a YA sci-fi novel that I really hoped to enjoy, and that was this. Charlie Jane Anders is a pretty well-known writer. She's kind of an internet celebrity. When I was doing research on her, she's done so much cool stuff. Like, she founded io9.com, and she's everywhere. She's a very internet person. And she wrote All the Birds in the Sky, which a bunch of people I know have read and really, really enjoyed. But I wanted to start with The City in the Middle of the Night because it is more science fiction-y. All the Birds in the Sky is set on Earth, and it's kind of a YA adventure romp between two characters, whereas this one is set on a different planet with a different ecosystem, different politics. It's set in the far future. It felt like it ticked off a lot of those boxes. Right now I have such a hankering for books that are just set on spaceships in space or on other planets, just away from Earth, in the future. That's all I can stand to read at the moment. I just can't get enough of it. And yet, I didn't enjoy this. With Chilling Effect, I felt like there was something in it for me, just not me in the present. But with this, I actually just don't think it was very well written. I would still recommend it, though, to some readers, because I know there's always a readership out there somewhere for some books. There are some books that I just despise, and I wouldn't recommend them to anyone, and I would be very honest about that. This, however, I still feel like that there is a really good potential readership, and I'm sure there exists a huge readership of people who've adored this book. I myself didn't get on with it for a whole bunch of reasons, and again, I'm going to dive into that in another video soon, but I have a lot of things to say about it, so stay tuned for that. I did a video on this recently, so I don't want to say much here. This is The Employees by Olga Raven, translated from Danish. I was going to say Dutch. Danish by Martin Aitken, and this again is a wonderful sci-fi novel by a woman writer, and it blew my socks off. Please watch my review about this and why you should read this, but The Employees is a experimental science fiction novel. It's a novel written as a series of kind of journal entries, interview recordings, and I now want to say the name of that type of writing, but I don't think I can say it. Let's try it. Epistolary? Is it epistolary? Let me know. Did I get that right? I feel like I'm nearly there. It ticks off so many of my boxes. It's a book in translation, it's by a woman writer, it's science fiction, and it's written as a series of notes and interview statements. So it's pretty much everything that I love in literature, all wrapped up in one single book. It's set in the 22nd century on a spaceship where interviews are being done with the human and android workers on a ship. It is a satire of workplace culture. It is also just speculative and experimental science fiction, and it explores the concept of artificial intelligence, which a lot of sci-fi does, but it does it from a new angle, a genuinely new angle. All of that makes for one of the best books I've read in a long time. I really, really love this book, and it's probably going to remain a highlight of my entire year, even though we're only in January. I really love The Employees. Last year, one of my favourite people in the entire world ever, my friend Callum, sent me this book to read, The Beauty by Aaliyah Whiteley. I'd never heard of this before. It actually came out I think like 5 or 6 years ago, and I was so pleasantly surprised by what I found here. This is a very, very strange, post-apocalyptic, pseudo-science fiction novel, and I'm going to sum it up as best as I can. A disease wiped out all the women. There is a group of men who kind of sit around a campfire and tell stories, and they have a little commune and they try to survive, and they mourn the loss of their women and they get sad. And our main protagonist is a 20-ish year old young man who never knew love or romance. He only remembers his mother and he misses her. But luckily, I guess, for these men, these mushrooms start sprouting out of the graves of their dead women, and those mushrooms continue to grow into approximations of women. They are woman-shaped, mustard-coloured, walking mushroom people, and they're known as beauties, and they are able to just autonomously walk around, and they end up pairing off with these different men. And there is a lot to go into in terms of its themes, but it's one of those books that seems to mostly ask questions rather than provide answers. It has a lot of themes about gender roles and the expectations on women by men. It covers a lot of ground in terms of those themes, but it doesn't necessarily have a perspective, I don't think, or answers. It just provides you with insight and questions and things to ponder. It's weird as hell, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's also only 100 pages. I read it in an afternoon, and I loved it. It's going to stay with me. It's not pleasant, and it's funny sometimes in a kind of awkward way, but I still really loved it. This is another weird and wonderful science fiction novel, The Seep. This is by Chana Porter. I picked it up at Gaze the Word in London. I saw the cover and I knew I had to have it. When I put it on social media, a bunch of people just said the same thing. This cover is fantastic. It is about an alien invasion of a different sort. It is told from the perspective of a 50-year-old trans woman who lives in, I think it's San Francisco. And aliens come and invade, but they do it in a very quiet way. They seep into our water supply, and they basically take over the entire planet. They take over our minds. They become kind of a drug for us to take, and the world overnight transforms. Capitalism falls, and life goes on, but very differently. Everyone on the planet can now pretty much do whatever they want. The Seep allows you to be who you want and do whatever you want. You can rewrite your life as you see fit, and it kind of works as like universal basic income, where suddenly the needs that we had previously in terms of our economy and capitalism don't exist anymore, and people are free to live hedonistically and reinvent themselves. They can physically change and grow wings, and most people seem to spend their time becoming artists and creators and performers. We have the time now to be creative, and our protagonist is married to a woman who has decided to use the Seep to turn back into a baby. She finds a couple in France to adopt her, and when she does this, she will lose all memory of her past life. She wants to start again. And it's about our protagonist dealing with the grief of losing her wife who chose to do this, while also exploring a new world built by aliens that is actually completely to our benefit. And yet she is grieving. She is feeling human loss. Yeah, this is great. Again, I'm going to mention this in more detail in an upcoming video. The other physical book that I read is Smashed by Junji Ito. Now, I love Junji Ito. People probably know that. I talk about him a lot. And I had spent a lot of time not reading Smashed, and it's only okay. My favourite book by Junji Ito is actually Shiver, a collection of short stories, and every single one of those stories slaps. They are all meticulously, perfectly written and drawn. They are the best examples of horror in all of fiction in my eyes. And Smashed, I was hoping, would be more of the same, and it's really not. It feels like B-sides. They didn't make it onto the album, but here you go anyway. Maybe some of them will be to your taste. And yeah, some of the stories in here are really good, but there are an awful lot that are so bad, I am shocked that they're by Junji Ito. They are campy and schlocky, but not in a fun way. I'm quite upset by how bad some of the stories are in here, but there were one or two that I've actually added to a few articles that I have about Junji Ito that you can go check out. There are a few bangers in here, there really are, but there are also some that are just embarrassingly bad, especially the very first story. Yeah, mixed feelings, mixed messages, mixed everything when it comes to this. You know, Shiver is... I don't do numbers and scores, but Shiver is a 10 out of 10 collection of horror stories, and this is like a 5. This is middle of the road, some good, some bad, some really good, some really bad. And the last thing that I read, other than the book I'm currently reading, which I'll mention next month, the book that I can't wait to talk about in its own dedicated video, which I'm going to film very, very soon, is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I don't want to spoil it because I can't wait to have a drink, probably, and talk about this book and get absolutely torn apart by all of his biggest fans in the comments section, but I fucking hated that book. I fucking hated it. I did not finish it. I got maybe a quarter of the way through and it is like 1,500 pages, and there was no way when I got a quarter of the way through and I couldn't stomach anymore, there was no way I was going to finish it. I have a lot of really fun reasons for why I hated 1Q84 so much, and I can't wait to talk about that, so stay tuned for a dedicated video about how much I fucking hated 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. Oh, that video is going to be fun. Subscribe for books and join my Patreon.